Ryan,
Tony, and Crystal.
We can't guarantee that you're gonna look great, but if you wanna stay in shape, well, you better hit the GymWits. That's right, man. Tell 'em.
welcome to the GymWits podcast. I'm Ryan George.
I'm Justin Guild, a.k.a. Chef Sonic.
And we are the GymWits. So today is officially our first recording of the new year. It's not the first one that's going to go out of the new year. I think this would be kind of episode 3 or 4 of the new year. But first recordings. How has your new year been so far?
Not bad. I've been thrust right back into the action. I thought I would have a couple more days off than I did, but I didn't. And that's just the way it goes. So I've been dealing with a lot, but it's all good. And so happy to be here making episodes in the new year.
Yeah, cool. I guess same for me. It's pretty much been the normal routine. It was kind of a quiet-ish end of the year, and then things went a bit crazy as you get the New Year's rush. So it's been a little busy, but yeah, pretty much back to normal. Not getting enough sleep.
Yeah. Which was I thought the resolution we were all supposed to take.
I mean, I'd love that to be a resolution. I just don't think it's, for me at least right now, it's not realistic. I'd like to plan my life so that I can make it my resolution in 2020, I guess. But I got about a year before I can even think about getting any kind of reasonable regular sleep. Like I get sleep like 2 days a week, but
nice.
It's not enough. So did you? I guess we're gonna do a little MMA talk. Did you watch the New Year's fight?
Yes. It was. Look, we know how great John Jones is, and I was sort of hoping that he was going to lose because I think he's turned into kind of not a great person, right? And I find that he's like a narcissist, but he's just the greatest fighter ever. Yeah. So, it's you'd like to see something that makes it a redeeming story. Like maybe he loses a fight, like something really sort of bad happens, and he has to sort of rise from the ashes and sort of change who he is. Like he hasn't really done anything bad, but
well, I mean, hitting a pregnant woman with a car is pretty bad, and running away from the scene, probably not the best thing in the world. But the thing with John Jones is, which is tough, is so having trained where I trained, I've met him a few times, and the times I've met him, he's incredibly personable. Like he seems like a genuinely good person, nice person. Will talk to you, will give you the time of day. So either he's a complete sociopath, or I like with anything, I think it's just complicated. I think he got thrust in the spotlight at a young age, didn't quite know how to handle it, probably had not the greatest people around him. And he is probably the best fighter on the planet, and I mean, it's hard to argue otherwise. Like he literally is somebody who there are not many people walking this earth that could beat him in a fight, and so it's got to do something.
There's
to you.
no one.
I mean, at this stage, there's no one.
MMA match,
I don't think a heavyweight. It doesn't matter the weight either. Yeah, it's like I think he is the best fighter on the planet. And by extension, probably ever. It's just like, and so that's got to do something to you when at the end of the day, as technologically advanced as we are, we're still fundamentally you want to beat people up, or there's that mano a mano thing, and he is the apex kind of human predator. So in that way, it's like it's got to mess with your brain to some extent. You kind of hope he. It's weird. You don't. It's kind of like he's become a villain. At first, he tried to be the hero. People didn't buy it, so now he's become the villain. He regardless of. I mean. He's been busted for steroids, and then there's a question of whether he did it for this one or not. Like, regardless of all that, and I'm not condoning it, he's still the best fighter in the world, and he kind of proved that. So,
I think maybe the real positive story that came out of, it was a great fight, but was that of Amanda Nunes, and congrats to her for beating the unbeatable Cyborg. Man, Amanda's just been so awesome, and she really put on a great performance, knocking out Cyborg. Yeah. Like, it wasn't beyond the realm of possibility that she would win that, but I wasn't expecting it like that.
Yeah, and for her, she's got to be the best female fighter amazing. Ever, I guess, right? Like, I mean, she's beaten
really
anyone who's been on that short list of like best fighter. She's handily beaten.
And for those who don't know, Chris Cyborg was basically an unstoppable force for how long? It was 12 years, like some ridiculous amount of time. She was unstoppable, one of the most dominant, and she actually has to go down in history as the greatest female fighter ever. Now I know that Nunes beat her, but
I think she loses that mantle. Like
no, I don't buy that. That the person who has recently beaten you, yes, she might be better than Cyborg now, and she might be better than Cyborg ever was. But I don't think you can discount history. You can't. That Cyborg did it for over a decade. Yeah. So if say Amanda can do it, and granted the competition wasn't as stiff, like Amanda can do it for like a solid 2 or 3 years, right? And she's on that path, then I would say yes. But it's like Cyborg really carried she created women's mixed martial arts.
But there's a difference between being a kind of pioneer in the sport, and so I get what you're saying, and Nunes has lost
this is a good
fights.
This is a good debate.
But here's the thing: like she's beaten arguably the 3 best fighters in the sport, right? And so
I agree.
You do that. I mean, I don't know. I can't. How do you argue against that?
Because there has to be something to longevity.
There is something to longevity,
right? And she just hasn't been doing it for that long.
But she's destroyed arguably the 3 best.
I know, but I want to see. I want to see her do it for a little bit longer before I want to put her as one of the best all time.
So here's the problem.
Start saying best all time. You need to.
Here's the issue.
Part of that has to do with longevity.
Okay,
like that's why GSP and Anderson are of the greats. Is Chris Weidman a better fighter than Anderson Silva?
No,
but he also beat him. He dethroned him.
Okay, well let's. Okay, so
but he didn't have longevity.
Well, let's take a second. All right, I know the point you're trying to make. The different. There are a couple of issues that are different.
This is
right?
devolved into an MMA
sorry,
debate.
non-MMA fans, you're gonna have to deal with this for a couple minutes. The difference is, first, women's MMA is not where men's MMA is, and it's not a sexist thing. I think we both know. Basically, don't cut me off.
Sorry.
The way the sport is, right? It's combat sports in general have always been kind of a men's domain. So the pool of talent is just much larger to draw from, and so you're going to have more developed overall skills for the men on the men's side. So women's MMA has been growing steadily, and you're getting much better fighters. And there's some women, and there are plenty of women who are technically as proficient and as good as the best of the men, but there's not the pool yet. It's growing, and maybe one day it does get to that level, but it's not the same level. So when Cyborg was dominant, she was dominant. She was a giant fish in a very small pond. There was not much competition for her. You cannot argue with me. You can't tell me that she fought people that were at the caliber of Chael Sonnen and Yushin Okami and Rich Franklin, the guys that Anderson Silva beat along the way, even Forrest Griffin and Bonner and all that, the guys or GSP, destroying who he beat along the way. Their caliber of the skill level and the caliber of fighter was completely. You can find on Cyborg's resume. I challenge you to find 2 fighters whose skill level was above a B level, and you're not going to find that.
The last two, Holly Holmes and
exactly.
She beat before,
exactly. She barely beat Holly Holm, and she got destroyed. And you can say Gina Carano. Yeah. So you give her 3 fights. One she won convincingly. One was a split decision.
Who was Cyborg's first UFC fight?
I forget.
But that, she was good too.
So fine. But I'm just saying, like, I see what you're saying. So yes, she's been dominant, but and I'm going to give you a men's example in a second. You know what's going to come. So she's been dominant, but you can't say she's the best. I mean, so she's been dominant, but in a small pool. Here's Nunes, who has fought now she's fighting in a time where women's MMA is very developed, and she's fought some really good fighters. It is much more developed than it was when Cyborg came through, and she is. She's lost a couple times, but she has run through the best women fighters in the history of the sport. So, yeah, I get the longevity argument, but I just don't think that it was the same pool of fighters as what Nunes has had to go through. And then not only does she go through better fighters, better competition, and have better results, but then she goes and she destroys Cyborg. So I understand the argument, but I just don't see how you can't put Nunes there, all things considered. Now, The same thing with Fedor. Like Fedor is, and I'm sure I'll get a lot of MMA fans are going to disagree with me. I don't know how you say I don't know. He had the longevity and he was undefeated for a very long time, but he was doing it in a time where there was the pool of fighters that he was drawing from was not very deep. Yes, I would say he had better wins than Cyborg, but it's kind of hard if somebody comes along and then destroys everybody at heavyweight. It's hard to not put somebody ahead of him because he just didn't have the same.
He beat Krokop, he beat Nogueira. Those were the best.
Yeah, you're right. He beat Krokop, he beat Nogueira. Who else did he beat?
Beat Heath Herring.
That's not
he never fought Josh Barnett.
He never fought Josh Barnett.
Strangely enough,
although I think he would have won, but he never
I think
fought
he
Josh
won.
Barnett.
He
beat Arlovsky.
He beat everyone in. He beat everyone in.
He has 3 or 4 wins. Like real wins. So
I don't know. It's the age old question, and people say the same thing about like Wilt Chamberlain. It's he was besides Bill Russell at the time. Right, he was in a league where he absolutely destroyed. Yeah. But does that take away from what he did?
No, it doesn't.
So I think that, and he's still considered an all-time great.
But I don't know that you can say he's the greatest center.
It's the classic debate.
Yeah.
Right. I just would like Nunes to have a little bit more longevity, because if she does great, but then just something happens, which I don't think is going to happen, because I think she's great, and she crashes and burns over for instance, Joanna, Janjacek, we were calling her the greatest flyweight, and at the time she was, and now she's fallen off. So now, do you still call her that? Like, she was unstoppable.
She was until she wasn't.
Until she wasn't.
But no, she didn't. But she didn't have the same longevity.
She did.
And again, that's the problem.
But she cleaned out the division as well.
That's the issue.
She did exactly what Nunes did. She cleaned out the division as well, and then she lost.
So women's MMA is where men's MMA was, let's say 10, 15 years ago, where one person could come along, go on a really good streak, and then they're the best fighter in their division because there's just not. It's not been around long enough. It's still in its infancy. So yeah, when she was winning, she was the best flyweight ever because that's the sport. It's a fledgling division. They're just getting started. So you're going to have people that continue to leapfrog each other because it's still, now again, women's MMA has come a long way, and it's getting to that point where you can't just do that, and you do need to account for history and account for longevity and things like that. I just think that in this case, with the people that Nunes has beat along the way, and then beating Cyborg in the kind of fashion that she did, I think it's hard to argue that she's not, the best fighter. But that's all. I
mean, but once again, I think that a little bit of semantics. She is the best, but I just don't calling her, like, I don't think it's fair to call someone the all time.
All right, well, let's
but we could go on, and it's a classic debate that people say in all fields and all sports and stuff like that. So it's a really interesting debate. Anyhow, so what do we have on tap?
Well, we got a couple interesting studies. So we're trying to get some.
And I know that Ryan has wants to vent about something too.
No, I'm not venting.
You're not venting?
In case that person is listening to the podcast, I'm going to keep it to myself. All right, so we got a couple studies to talk about. We'll see if you have any questions or anything. Just stuff that I want to get out. We have been lazy about it I've been lazy about it when we do these interviews. I'm like, whatever, we'll just do the interview. But anyway, this one comes out of the University of Bath, and it was I like it because it's about calories burned while standing. So I think we like to place emphasis on walking and standing and being active, and I think it's important, but I always feel like when we talk about being active, outside of exercise, it's always important to mention it's more like it counters the negative effects of not being active. So you're not going to be walking to get fit, or you're not going to be, standing or at a standing desk to be fit. You're doing it to not deal with the negative health effects of sitting. So you still have to exercise. And so you always want to kind of keep that in mind. Just because you're walking, you walk a mile to work or whatever, it doesn't necessarily mean that you shouldn't exercise. So anyway, to get to the study,
no, it means you should still exercise.
It means you should, whatever I said.
It doesn't mean that you cannot,
Yeah, so what this study was basically trying to determine how many extra calories are burned standing versus being seated. And so what they did is that 46 men and women who were normal weight, and they were wearing a mask that would they wore a mask to determine their basal metabolic rate, which is kind of what you burn at rest. And then they were asked in different settings to sit, stand and lie down for 20 minutes at a time. And while they were in those positions, they could do whatever they wanted, but they could fidget, they could move. You weren't like, it wasn't like you had to sit still for that time, but you had to be in that position. What they found was that people sitting burned 3% more calories than people laying, and people standing burned 12% more calories than people sitting.
As just a quick thing, the people laying down were not sleeping, correct?
No, they were just laying down. So now what they found basically was, so you think, okay, 12% sounds like a lot, standing versus sitting, but that only amounts to 9 extra calories. So when you think about it from a perspective of like weight loss, sure, standing is good and better than sitting, and it's going to fight off some of the negative health effects of sitting and being sedentary, but it's not going to replace a weight, not replace an actual training program. So, again, the idea for, the takeaway for me is kind of, it's two parts. You don't want to overemphasize, you don't want to be sedentary, but we shouldn't overstate standing and walking as being, all you have to do. You still have to get into the gym. You still have to do your cardio.
They're good for your overall health and wellness to stand more and to walk more, but it's not going to really impact either your weight or your fitness level all that much is what you're saying.
Yeah. All right, and then the second one, we have another interesting study. So this comes out of Dartmouth College. So this has to do with kind of pictures and calorie content on food and advertising, and kind of how that makes kind of the decisions we make. And I think it's interesting.
I hate it. I hate it.
I know why you hate it. I'm sure I know. But do you agree with it? Out of curiosity,
I think
so. You don't think the government should require that?
No. Well, but that's more for political purposes. Yeah. I don't think that because. I'm somewhat libertarian, assuming that there's a level playing field. So I guess very briefly, there's two sides to the debate.
Yeah.
One is I don't like the idea that the government has to impose something that is quote unquote good for us.
Yeah.
Right? I feel like we have access to the internet. We have access to plenty of educational resources. We could find out what calories. We could find out what the food content is. With that being said, I think that with an equal playing field, we know that not everyone is educated, not everyone is aware of health, the health implications of eating certain foods. So the counter to that would be there are people that are not educated that need to know if they go into McDonald's how many calories are in the Big Mac meal. Yeah. So I think that actually, if you're going to McDonald's though to eat that you're probably that is.
Well, you say that, but you also got to consider there's socioeconomic aspects to it.
There's so much
a lot
that
to it, so,
goes into it. I don't like the idea of the government imposing things for just almost anything for commercial establishments or really anyone to do it unless there is a very direct health benefit or issue, which I guess they're saying that there is.
I mean,
it's a very tough debate.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because like we get into this. I have a few
but
friends.
I also just hate it because it makes me feel bad about what I eat.
Yeah, I mean, there is that question of like, to what extent should the government impose themselves? And I think there's an argument for both sides. I definitely understand the argument. To me, you can't kind of divorce, the government from our lives, and I think there's once you have it, you kind of have to. There are concessions you have to make, which I'm okay with. Like I'm not, I want to say I'm libertarian mostly socially, but I do think that there's something to be said for let's say the smoking ban, right? Like banning that, or
to me
let's
that
say
makes a lot more
advertisements
sense
because of health. Right?
Because that's a direct health. Because if you're in somewhere, you don't want to have to smoke someone else. To me, I feel that's a little different.
Now you get
very different.
You do get a slippery slope there because then it's like, well, at what point do we stop regulating? Because you can argue that, let's say, sugary beverages and sodas and unhealthy food.
I hate the limitation on it.
Well.
Right. While I wouldn't recommend drinking, a huge big gulp, I don't think it's the government's right, as they have done, to impose you can only sell a certain size.
Okay, so that's fair. But you can also argue that those things have led to the obesity epidemic. They've led to skyrocketing healthcare costs, and theoretically, if you were, let me finish.
I'm not saying anything. I'm just nodding.
So theoretically, if you have a situation where people are eating healthier and you have a healthier populace, significant money can be saved on healthcare costs then theoretically. So I mean, again, I don't know where you go with that. I don't think you can stop. Like, I agree. I think, look, I mean, personally, when it comes to any kind of substance, whether it's drugs or tobacco, for the most part, I do think we should have much looser regulations on that stuff, or we allow, but I don't know, because then it's like, okay, well, maybe we allow certain drugs, but then whatever the case is on that stuff, you should be allowed to do it. But I think we do. I don't think it's unfair or unreasonable to make people aware. So just as like, making people aware of the effects of smoking seems to have had an effect on the numbers. Although I think, also in New York, at least, you just can't smoke anywhere. So it makes it much harder. I don't know that, you're like, let's say with calories and stuff, and it's funny how we totally sidetracked off the study, but making people aware of the content, it to me is not the same as restricting it. You're just giving that information to people, and you're making it open and clear. And since we do have a populace that's largely uninformed, about lots of things, like we're all uninformed. We all have aspects of our lives that we're uninformed about, and that yet we still make important decisions. You could take I don't know why it come up, like the housing crisis from 2008 was largely because you had people these kind of predatory practices taking advantage of unsuspecting people who were largely unaware of the kind of contracts they were getting into and the types of situations they're in. So we all make decisions about important aspects of our lives where we're largely ignorant about it. So I don't know that it's wrong for the government to say, all right, you can do X, Y, and Z, but you need to be very transparent about it. So I'm on the line of like, yeah, I don't think you necessarily should restrict sugary beverages, but I don't see why you can't make sure that people make it clear that, yeah, this thing's got 800 calories or whatever.
Sure. So, all right, but and once again, we could have a very interesting debate on this. It's the reason why I think it's because it's an easy Band-Aid for the government to say, see, we're doing something. But how come when you go to a grocery store, when you're buying food, it doesn't show you how the food was prepared, or the fact that there is horrific factory farming? It doesn't show you a picture of what the animal factories look like.
Okay, but that's
why doesn't it? Or when you go to do anything, does the government not show you, oh, well, the prison system benefits a lot of people financially because people invest in it. So like you could show anything.
You're totally right. Well, so first
anything.
of all, you're totally right. Number one. Number
So
two,
why
that's
that?
a logical fallacy. Forgetting the name of the fallacy. Well, you're yes. Yes to both. So
yeah.
There's no you're right.
It's like they're choosing a convenient thing that seems easy, but
you can't argue. So there are two separate issues that you then need to argue for each thing individually. So if your argument is then, well, if we do X, then we got to do everything. Then we shouldn't do X. That's not a valid argument.
I agree.
So I think, and again, I'm not. And it would be different if you were kind of calling me out for hypocrisy. If I said, I totally think we need to put stuff up on fast food stores or restaurants, but no, we shouldn't show people about factory farming, then you're absolutely right. But I'm not saying anything hypocritical. Yes, you're right. Like, I think people should be more informed about all this
why
stuff.
don't they? But why? So why are they forced to do that?
But that's a separate issue.
But it's tied in. And I'll tell you why. Because if you're informing what calories are, you should all then to me. Then it would only be logical. And yes, they're two separate things, but the answer is why. So why, when you go and buy food at a grocery store, do you not see the farming and how it's prepared? Because those people that are preparing the food are lobbyists.
Oh, yeah,
give a ton of money,
you're right.
and it would hurt their bottom line.
Oh, no. So here, look. Here's the issue. Here's where we're on the same page. Here's where we're on the same page, and I totally 100% agree with you. The biggest issue in our world, in our society, because I think we have a lot of things wrong with the country and with the world, and at the same time, I say that we're probably we are living the best life of any group of people ever. So I'm not going to kind of talk about how horrible my life is because we got President Cheeto. But sorry to any listeners that are fans of his. But regardless, like, the issue, it's easy to look at the symptoms and say, okay, that's wrong. That the real problem is money, and whether you're, and that's the thing is like whether you're Republican or I don't know how we got to politics, but whether you're Republican or Democrat, I think that's one issue everyone could rally around is that money has a disastrous, awful effect on politics, and I think that they're beholden to dollars and they're not beholden to constituents. And if I don't know that I've ever voted for a Republican, but I will tell you one situation where I would vote Republican is if you had a candidate that honestly said, I'm going to take that, I want this to be a battle of ideas and I want to get rid of money in politics. That's one situation where I would actually really consider it in spite of all the other things that I don't agree with kind of socially, because I think that the root cause of all this is that aspect. And so you're right, that if the lobby is big enough, they will likely be able to, it's kind of like I gave Trump credit for a couple things he did. I don't know why we got into Trump now, but I gave him credit for a couple things. I actually thought that like pulling out of Syria was a good idea, but I also is like the military kind of industrial complex is too big for him to just do that. And sure enough, they're backtracking. Why is he backtracking on that? Because we're a more war machine, and so much of our money goes to that we're so sure. That is one of that's just that it's a toxic part of our country. So whether you feel like whether you're more libertarian, whether you're more socialist, whether you're Democrat, Republican, whatever it is, I think the unless you are unless you're part of that like kind of top percent or you're a big corporation, your voice isn't really being heard.
GymWits goes political.
Yeah,
sort of. I think we're not.
Yeah, no, but I mean, but it's true, and so I would say to anybody out there, well, yeah, okay, I won't say anything. Yeah, we'll
donate to the GymWits. That's okay.
Don't no. just
we'll run for office if you don't.
Yeah, tell your local leaders that you want to get money out of politics, and maybe but that, I think that to me is the central issue.
So what was it? Go back.
Back to the study.
Yeah.
So somehow we went into.
Well, we're already almost 30 minutes in.
I know, and then we got an interview that ran like 50 minutes. So you guys are in for a lot today. Except for like the however many that just cut off when I
you could hear like the
you could hear the
sound of like the
unsubscribe. No. So but actually no, if you would have listened to me a few weeks ago, my liberal friends were all pissed at me because I not that I was like running around saying Trump it was great, but I actually had given him credit for a few things that then he of course went and screwed up, but I did give him credit. So I'm if you are conservative and got I'm actually like fairly I will give credit where I think it's due, and while I don't agree with 90% of the stuff, if there's something like I feel like people get a little overly crazy about like with the Syria thing. I don't know why I'm still talking about it. Like with the Syria thing, like I think liberals went months ago. They're like, let's get out of Syria. Now they don't want to because Trump wanted to, and I think that's where you look bad. Is like be consistent and just look. If you did something right, you say you did something right, and that's it, and you just move on with your life. But all right, whatever the case is. Okay, on to this study. So it comes from Dartmouth College, and it was about the calorie content plus a picture and whether or not it makes food appetizing. So this was 40. So again, it's like 42 students, 18 to 22. So we're not getting a ton. Obviously more would need to be done, but they had 189 food images without data, and then they followed it with images with the calorie content that they were showing to these students. So they were basically asked to rate the desire for the food, and they were connected to an fMRI while doing this. So of the group, you had 22 people that were dieters, and then 20 people who were non-dieters. So just people who were kind of focused on their diet, and 20 people, to put it simply, were not too focused on their diet. So both groups rated the labeled foods as less appetizing. So they both rated the the food that had the calorie content as less appetizing. Makes sense. We've all experienced that. I certainly have, and I've made different choices when I've seen that, which is often when I know I want something bad, I'll just try to ignore the calorie content altogether. And what they found was that it was it had a greater effect among dieters. So I think people who were aware of their diet at the moment, it had a greater effect on them. I didn't write down the percentages, so I can't give you the exact percentages. But another interesting thing is that so you basically had the regions of the brain connected with reward systems and the regions of the brain connected with the control system. So kind of controlling behavior. So in both groups, there was decreased activation in the reward system of the brain, also for the ones with the calorie content, and there was increased activation of the control system of the brain. So almost right away with the calorie content, the brain also said up, it decreased activation in that reward center and increased the control center. So almost the body had a physiological reaction of, all right, I don't need it, and I'm going to be stronger about it with the calorie content. So, yeah, I mean, if you want to have an effect on your populace, like I said, you don't need to ban soda. You don't need to ban certain size soda. But it seems that if you give more data, people may make more informed decisions.
Yes, and I think it's just to go back on what I was saying. At no point did I ever say that it was bad posting the caloric content. No, I don't like it personally. My issue with it was I don't like the fact that commercial establishments are forced to do it. That was my issue, right? But I think that if a commercial establishment wants to do it because out of goodness for public health, I think that would be
but that's where I would disagree then, because I think then that gets back to
do it on their own. I think that would be good, but as we know, they're being forced to do it, and it's.
Which I think is okay.
You think it's okay?
Yeah, because I do think it helps people to make more informed decisions.
Yeah.
Then it
brings us back to the.
It does bring it does.
Then shouldn't we? There should be a lot more things we should be informed about.
Yeah. So no, but again,
we're not.
yeah. I mean, we can go. You can dive down that again if you. But I think that it's okay to require that. I like how I'm saying it's okay to require them to do it. You're like you're going to force it. So already you hear the difference in kind of our own ideologies and how we're talking about it. But I think that's okay because it is a public. There is a public health issue with obesity, and if we had a more informed if people were more informed generally, then maybe it'd be a little bit better. But they're not. So if adding that little bit of data helps people make better decisions, especially in a situation where again, yes, we have high costs of our healthcare. I don't need to dive down that political kind of hole, but if it's an issue that can help the public. And help people, especially being kind of uninformed. I don't see it as that big of a deal. And, maybe you can make it, okay, it's restaurants that, like in New York, it's like if you have more than X amount of restaurants, you have to put the calorie content so they don't force it on let's say smaller businesses and whatever. But, so fine, you can find little caveats here and there if you want. But I don't see it being that awful of a thing or that bad of a thing to include the calorie content if it does show, if you can produce studies that show that it has a good public health outcomes, I'm okay with that because you're not restricting anybody from you're not stopping people from you're not saying you can't have the triple cheeseburger. Sure. You're just saying you're going to know that triple cheeseburger has 1,500 calories. I don't see what's wrong with that.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I think for once again, it's the hypocrisy behind it of that they're choosing to do that when there are so many other public health things that might not be as easy for them to get away with. But so I guess I can see what you're saying. Yeah, one thing is better than nothing. You don't have to do everything. I just to me the concept behind it is what bothers me. Is that they're picking and choosing what to do based on what they can get away with.
Yeah, but that's our world. I mean, let's say if you are somebody who does want to get at the industry. You may not be able to take down the factory farming industry like that. You may not. Okay, I'll give you a good example. What I think is a good example. When we went to Thailand, we stayed at an elephant. We stayed at an elephant sanctuary. And so the woman who runs the sanctuary, it's called Boon Lot Elephant Sanctuary, amazing place. I think it's Bless on Facebook. The woman rescues elephants, and you don't ride the elephants. You don't she doesn't really don't really feed the elephants. Although one day when they were doing some work on one of their foot, they gave me a thing to feed them. And they're very much kind of she wants the elephants to kind of be as if they would be in the wild. So there's not as much human interaction. You don't go to some places will have you bathe the elephants, and most sanctuaries, if it's a good sanctuary, is not going to have you ride the elephant. But you're there to kind of just you watch them as they are in the wild. And she said if they interact with you, then it's on their terms. And I think I've talked about it in the podcast. I had one of the most amazing experiences of my life with one of the elephants actually interacting with me and saying goodbye to me when we left. It was the sweetest thing, and probably the most one of the greatest things I've ever experienced was being around these elephants. So what she was explaining in Thailand, elephant work is really brutal. They between the breeding of the elephants, between the elephant rides, the working elephants, they really treat, they're it's really rough on the elephants. But the problem is that you can't just go to these, some of these people, their generations and generations have been with elephants. So you can't, you can't just go to the, you can't tell them like, oh, stop doing it, bad Thai person, stop making your living riding the elephants. The way to get around it is you have to inform people, and the more people are knowledgeable, you kind of you plant that seed, and over time you can affect change, and over time you can then as that starts to grow, and as you start to there begins to get kind of like a groundswell, you can then start to make larger and larger kind of policy changes. And so, I think the same thing is here. Is like we both would love, as much as we love meat, we'd love more regulations, or a farming industry that was more ethical, at a minimum. We'd love that people maybe ate less meat. We love all these things that you probably can't implement now because the lobbies are too big. But if you start, you can start somewhere, and then go build from there. And so I see it as like, if you can't get your ultimate goal, if you can start chipping away, that's one thing you can start to do. Yeah. No, and with the health stuff, sure. Like, you do what you can.
Yeah. Yeah. And of course we could talk about that.
We should just release this as a podcast.
We should. Yeah. All right. All
right. So we've got an interview today, actually.
Yeah. A really great one too.
Yeah, it's really good. It is with Dr. Ellington Darden, and we have he's got a new book out from Men's Health. Yep, called Killing Fat, and goes into a lot of great stuff. I read the book; it's really good. A lot of useful information. Great, kind of before and after stuff, which is always useful when you have something like this.
And we'll talk about it afterwards. But one thing I like about the before and afters is that they're like a black and white and plain.
Yeah.
Instead of the tricks that people can do with before and afters.
Yep.
So, all right, enjoy the interview with Dr. Darden, or as he just prefers to be called, Ellington.
Well, no, he said, us. I don't know. No, it's true.
Well, no, okay.
No, maybe.
We can get into it. But he said that after a long time, he doesn't have to be called Dr. Darden.
Fair enough. Although we didn't say it on the podcast. Right. So.
Yeah.
All right, yeah. Now, yeah. Okay, yeah, let's just turn it over to Dr.
Cut it, yeah. Hey, everyone. We are here with Dr. Ellington Darden, who is an exercise researcher, and I have pretty much a doctoral thesis in front of me of your credentials, so we could list all of them, and it's very extensive. So yeah, just you were named one of the top 10 health leaders by the President's Council on Physical Fitness and Sports, and you've written a bunch of books, and in fact, that's why you're here to talk about your new book for Men's Health, Killing Fat, which is awesome. So thanks, Ellington, for coming on the GymWits.
Yeah, sure. It'll be a good time.
Yes, it always is. So the first question we always ask before we jump into it is about your background in fitness.
Yeah, well, that goes back a long time. I grew up outside of Houston, Texas, in a small town called Conroe, and that was back when if you were a boy in high school, you wanted to be an all-around athlete. I remember I saw a movie when I was about 12 related to the Jim Thorpe story. Now, Jim Thorpe was an Indian in early part of the 1900s that could do just about anything related to track and field and football and baseball, basketball, you name it. He was an all-around athlete. So most of the athletes that I admired from an early age that went to my high school could do a little bit of everything. So that was what I wanted to do. So I played football, baseball, basketball, and did some running and throwing the shot and discus. So that got me started on wanting to be a good athlete. And it just so happened that when I was in the 8th grade, we had a coach that bought a dozen barbells and brought them to our school, and all the athletes lifted barbells, probably incorrectly, but at least we lifted them wanting to be big and strong. And so that started me off in a strength training and you might say a bodybuilding career when I was about 14 or 15. And I'm still trying to be bigger and stronger. So that gradually spread. I went into physical education in college and got a bachelor's and a master's degree from Baylor University, and then went to Florida State University and followed up on exercise science and food and nutrition, and started working with Arthur Jones and Nautilus Sports Medical Industries right after that. So that sort of gives you a thumbnail sketch of what happened for the first 30 years of my life.
Nice. That's quite an adventure.
So now what kind of attracted you to the fitness industry? Because it's such a kind of diverse, just interesting but dynamic industry. Like, what was it about that world that you decided, I'm going to make this my career. This is what, this is my path in life?
Well, first it was, like I said, it was to be a better athlete by becoming bigger and stronger. So I wanted to learn how to get the best results from lifting weights. And that took me about 20 years to figure all that out. And then I wanted to learn all I could about losing weight, or more specifically, losing fat. So I spent 20 years trying to figure out the best way to deal with strength training and muscle building, and another 20 years trying to figure out how to deal with losing fat. And you might say that the last 10 years, I've tried to put both building muscle and losing fat together. And I've sort of figured out that building muscle is the best way to lose fat, and losing fat is the best way to build muscle. So those two have come together in this book of mine called Killing Fat.
I'm sorry, Ryan, to interrupt you. I have a quick little sidebar question that I always wonder. Could you have ever expected the fitness industry to be worth the billions and billions that it is now when you first got into it? Could you have ever imagined it going in this direction?
Probably not. There seemed to be so much quackery involved initially that you got to work through to find the truth. And boy, it's still there. I mean, it seems like there's probably more today than there was when I first got interested in the 1950s and 1960s. I remember when I was about 15 or 16, I went down, this was before I could drive an automobile. I went down to Houston with my mother. She had to see the dentist, and it was in the downtown area. And there was a health food store there, one health food store that I knew of in all of Houston. And there was, you could smell it a half a block away because you could just smell those vitamins, every time somebody opened the door. And there was an old woman in there that looked like the Wicked Witch of the West. She was probably about 60, but she looked like she was about 90. But boy, could she sell all those promises and claims. So I would spend $50 in that health food store and come out of there with a sack full of vitamins and minerals and protein tablets and wheat germ oil, thinking that I had the truth about how to get big and strong. And I think it did help me from the standpoint of, man, I believed in it. And somewhere in my book, I point out that if you believe in whatever program you're doing to be bigger and stronger, or to lose weight or lose fat, that may be 50% of the battle for the first 5 or 6 weeks anyway, you know?
Yeah. So I read the book, and there's a lot of great information in it, and so I'm always interested again with authors. You know, now as we talked about, there's so much in the industry, good and bad, science-based quackery. But for you, in writing this book, I guess what was missing in the fitness world, or in the literature, in the books that were out there? What was missing that you felt like your book kind of served that need?
Well, I felt like I had a program, a 6-week and a 12-week program that would actually cause you to, transfer fat out of your body through thermodynamics, which I bring out in the first several chapters. So it took me a long time to come up with all the basic components that are involved in getting rid of fat, but it boils down to 4 things that you've got to reduce your dietary calories. You got to build muscle at the same time as you're doing that, and you got to superhydrate your system with a lot of cold water, and then you got to understand the heat and cold implications that your body's under through studying, biology 101 and physics 460. It's a complex idea of transferring fat, transferring heat out of your body, and then being vigilant after you lose it to not allow it to come back in, which is to say you gotta get rid of the fat and then keep it out of your body over the long term. And that's what I try to explain, going from a complicated science to some easy to understand guidelines.
So can you maybe explain the thermodynamics and kind of, obviously it's something that it's kind of ubiquitous in life, but we don't really think about how it applies to exercise, applies to weight loss, applies to fitness. So maybe you can explain thermodynamics as a concept and how you kind of integrate that idea into fitness. I don't want to say like you use thermodynamics in fitness because it's always there, but kind of how the idea helps to explain kind of what the body is doing when you are trying to lose weight and or gain muscle.
Well, it goes back to the biology, your first biology classes, probably in high school, where you try to understand that you can't create or destroy energy. We being warm-blooded animals, we can't absorb energy from the sun, but we can get energy that the sun radiates to plants primarily. So that's where the eating comes in, and the eating of fruits and vegetables, breads and cereals, and then animals that also do the same thing. So we eat animals. So that's one of the basic concepts of you've got heat that goes into energy, that goes into food, that goes into calories, and it's just it's a rotary situation. Calories in and calories out. So once you understand that and study a little bit about Albert Einstein and his thermodynamics and what made him great, then it all kind of goes together, that calories count, that you have to understand calories in food and calories in activity, action, and exercise. And you've got to take advantage of it by learning the science and then applying the guidelines. And that's what I try to do in the book is start off in a scientific fashion, but then give you some tips and guidelines on how you can use it to your advantage if you're trying to lose fat.
So, just as a sort of an add-on to that, thermodynamics, because it sounds cool, has become, or it sounds hot, more like, it has become a buzzword and has become a marketing term. So, lots of supplements on the market that are mainly caffeine and a whole bunch of other things like that, saying that taking this supplement will increase thermodynamics in the body. Could you just speak on those claims that are being made?
Well, I think there are some claims that are true that caffeine has an effect to elevate your core temperature, and there are other situations, fruits, vegetables, and chemicals that do something similar. And the human body itself has much better ways to do it than to rely on some type of pill that you get or supplement that you get from department store or health food store. You know, you've got the body's wonderful mechanism of you know, your muscles provide heat and your fat provides coolness. So when you combine those two together, then what you're trying to do is figure out how to get rid of this heat. And of course, fat is a form of heat. So when you exercise, you're getting rid of heat through the carbon dioxide that comes out of your mouth and nose, and you're also getting rid of the warmth that comes through your skin. And one thing I point out in the book that most people aren't aware of is that almost shivering burns 3 times the calories as vigorous sweating. So when you look at a melting ice cube versus a candle that's lit, you see that both are means of getting rid of heat. So once you understand how the mechanisms work and the thermodynamics behind it, you can use both cold and heat to assist you in losing fat and building muscle. And that's what I've tried to do. And I found, at least adding these things all together, then it's possible to actually lose a pound of fat a day. And you know, most of what other people push, it's quackery on how they do it. So you've got to bring together these components in the proper manner to get the most efficient use out of the heating and cooling systems of the body. And that's what killing fat's about.
So that's actually the next question. So you kind of the general kind of rule of thumb in fitness has always been like 1 to 2 pounds a week of fat loss. So what what do you do, or how does your program between the exercise and the diet, what about that allows for kind of the facilitated or accelerated fat loss beyond what that kind of normal rule of thumb is in the kind of health and fitness world?
Yeah, well, 1 to 2 is considered to be the standard, and I get 7 to 8 pounds a week on most strong men who are involved. So, it's bringing in the right type of carbohydrate-rich foods to accelerate the use of water in your system, and then consuming a large amount of cold water. You know, I try to get everyone to drink at least a gallon of ice cold water a day, 128 ounces. And if you've got access to using a cold plunge 4 or 5 days a week where you get chin deep in 52-degree water, boy, that is a huge way to accelerate loss of heat from your body. And if you don't have a cold plunge, fortunately, I've always been able to do a lot of my research at this big fitness center 100 miles from where I live. I live in Orlando, and my good friend Joe Cerulli has the Gainesville Health and Fitness Center in Gainesville, which is 100 miles from here. So he's got 28,000 members there, and it's easy to recruit dozens of men and women to go through these programs that I have as a testing regiment. So, and they have a cold plunge there, a big, 15 by 15 foot pool of 52-degree water. Have you ever tried something like that, Ryan? Or
Yes, it's brutal.
They're becoming very popular, really all over the world. Like now,
but few people have used it properly, So,
what is the kind of proper protocol for it?
To ease in there about an hour after you do a hard workout, and you stay about 5 minutes. You get chin deep, and you extend it to 10 minutes after several times, and then that's what you need on a 3 or 4 day per week regimen. And if you do that, boy, you burn 50 calories of fat every minute. So, and if you stand there 10 minutes, that's 500 calories. That's a lot of caloric burn from a 10-minute period of time.
No, for sure. And
it's effective. It helps you lose fat, and it helps you build muscle because it takes some of the inflammation away from a hard workout. You've probably experienced that too.
Yeah, I've heard that it has that besides just fat loss and caloric burning, that it has other health benefits as well. So it's definitely, I think, something that's going to really catch on even more in the next few years. So now, I have a question. The holy grail of fitness has always been, or at least in the last 30, 40 years, right, to lose fat and gain muscle, and that's what you're all about. So it really begs the question: how is with your plan? Are you gaining muscle? Are you gaining size at a caloric deficit?
Well, I have explored for the last since 1975 the advantage of using eccentric work or negative work, you might say, in the lifting and lowering of a barbell or an exercise machine. So my colleague Arthur Jones started experimenting with a negative phase of a strength training exercise back in the early 1970s. And I followed up on that. And in the last 10 years, I've been using it almost exclusively. And in this Killing Fat book, I have my most recent method of applying it to barbells and dumbbells and exercise machines, and I call it 30-10-30. So that's the negative exercise, the lowering of an exercise machine or a barbell or dumbbell is the most important phase of stimulating a muscle to grow bigger and stronger. And most people don't know that, especially average people. So, I've got several chapters in the book on how to make adaptations and how to use it to your advantage.
So now, do you mix that also with other more, lack of a better word, like more functional training, or do you kind of is most of the fitness regimen based around the kind of negative aspect of the exercises?
Yeah, most of if you're trying to lose fat, then absolutely you want to stimulate your muscles to grow. Muscles to grow briefly. And I do so with only 8 exercises, which are performed one set to failure, momentary muscular failure, only twice a week. Then what I found that really helps the whole process is instead of doing more exercise on your off days, you focus on relaxing and resting. Because especially at night, getting a good 9 hours of sleep a night, that's the time you lose the most fat and you build the most muscle, is at night. So I reinforce people working hard only twice a week and then getting out and resting and relaxing, at least while they're losing the fat for 6 to 12 weeks. Once you get it off, then you can go back to more of an action-oriented daily schedule and do other sports and fitness activities, but not while you're trying to get it off.
Yeah, it's funny. You mentioned two things: getting sleep and drinking a lot of water. We were talking about some changes that people can make, or kind of our New Year's episode. We were talking about realistic changes people can make, and it's amazing how much getting good sleep and drinking adequate water can affect your life and your body without making any other changes. So it definitely falls.
And a lot of people don't. They don't apply that, or they don't believe you, and. So they leave those two things off and they go on some kind of weird diet or a low carbohydrate situation, which doesn't help in my opinion.
Yeah, no, so let's talk about that a little bit, because you don't stress low carbohydrate, and I think it's one of these kind of things that you go back and forth 1 week or 1 month or 1 year. Low carbohydrate diets are a fad, then it's something else, and then it goes back and forth. So, kind of, I guess, give us your take. What's your stance on that? Is there a dip? And I guess to add on to that, even when it comes to sugars, are all sugars created equal? Does it matter what kinds of sugar? Does it matter where it comes from? So I guess if you can kind of answer both from the carbohydrate perspective, but also from sugar, because that's a big thing in your book, maybe kind of answer that for our listeners and kind of give us an idea of what we should be doing.
Yeah, well, remember I was saying one thing I want to happen in the human body, I want to superhydrate the system. So if you look at the word carbohydrate, at one time it was called hydrated carbons. So that's what carbohydrates do in your system. They help hydrate. They help keep the water in, which most people desperately need, especially the overfat ones, because I see most people that I deal with walk around partially dehydrated and don't even know it. So if you eliminate carbohydrates from your system, your body gets rid of water. And that confuses a lot of people because they think that losing water is fat, and it's not. There's not much water in fat, but there's a lot of water in your muscles and in your internal organs and in your extracellular fluid. But you don't need to lose this. Your body needs to have most 70% of your body weight is a result of the water you have in your body. So if you can get even more water, it's probably to your advantage. Now, as far as breaking the carbohydrates down into sugars and starches, I do that in my diet, but what I try to get people to understand is when you're eating small meals, and I push that in the book, men have 400 calorie a day meals, 3 standard meals, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and then they have 3 snacks. Now, a snack is from 100 to 300 calories. So actually, you've got 6 small meals a day. And all of these meals are at least 50% carbohydrates. So this is a carbohydrate-rich diet. And on those small meals, it doesn't matter much if it's starch or sugar. I don't tell people that sugar is bad. I think it's good. A moderate amount of sugar makes a lot of foods taste better. So I push a moderate amount of sugar and a larger amount of starches, vegetables and breads and cereals. Those are the main carbohydrates I push. But on a 14, 15, 1,600 calorie day diet, which is what I push for men, then it's hard to go wrong on having, carbohydrates at the level of 50 to 60%.
So one issue, as you also bring up in the book, is that most diets kind of are doomed to failure. I think it's like 90% or somewhere in that range. So
yeah,
I guess,
at least.
And so I guess there are two. I guess it's kind of a two-part question: is how is your approach different? As far as kind of dealing with that potential failure, and then what do you do about the maintenance aspect to ensure that once you have the results, that you keep the results, for a year or 2 years, for a lifetime, after losing all that?
Yeah, well, once you lose a large amount of fat, you've got to keep your muscle strong. You got to continue to keep your muscle strong, or even add more muscle. Muscle speeds up your metabolic rate. If you look at a pound of muscle and a pound of fat, you got a tremendous amount of blood flow in muscle and not very much blood flow in fat. That's why if you look at one under a microscope and compare it to the other, you'll see the muscles loaded with capillaries, and there's capillaries in fat as well, but not very many. That's why fat looks like fat on a T-bone steak, and muscle looks red like muscles look. So you've got to up your dietary calories. You can't continue to support your body on 1,500 or 1,600 calories a day if you're a man. You've got to eventually add 1,000 calories to that, and do more action activities that burn calories, and continue to strength train your body, and continue to drink water, and also understand the thermodynamics behind it, and be vigilant. I have, toward the end of the book, I think it's in the last chapter, I talk about the transfer of calories outside your body. It's sort of like having a dog inside your house who's misbehaving, and you put it outside. Well, most of the dogs I've seen will hang around the back door and nudge the door and make all kinds of noise because they won't back in, And that's what happens when you lose heat, when you lose fat through heat and you transfer it outside your body. That heat hangs around and won't back in, especially if it's just recently been exhumed outside your body. So you got to be very vigilant, understand those problems, and not be like most people who transfer the fat out, and then within months, it's back, and most people add to it. So you got to understand the thermodynamics behind the transfer of it and how to keep it off. And I try to do that.
So, fat is, for the longest time now, is such an interesting term. Dietary fat on the body, but with more research and just everything that's coming out, we're learning that it's really quite complicated. And now, as on the GymWits, we've done a few different episodes about this. So, could you talk a little bit about the different types of bodily fat, and how there isn't just one fat?
Yeah, well, you've got I guess most people have about 50% of the fat they have is subcutaneous fat. It's right under the skin, all over the body. Now, it's thickest around the middle and thinnest around the hands, the feet, and the forehead. And that's for a reason, because, our evolution that's taken place over 1 million years, it's just recently that we had modes of transportation that would allow us to go, more than 10 or 15 miles in a day. And if, until recently, if you'd had 25 people that had to walk from Florida to Texas, you couldn't do it if you had a lot of fat around your hands, feet, and head. So most of it accumulated around your midsection, which allowed you to move your limbs. And that's still where the majority of your subcutaneous fat is. But besides the subcutaneous fat, you've got several other kinds. You've got depot fat, which is more or less inherited from your mother and father and your grandparents. And you can see this if you have group pictures that go back several generations. Men store fat differently than women. Women tend to store it around the back side, men around the front side. And you got another type of fat besides depot and subcutaneous that's called essential fat, which is around your eyes, and around your brain, and around your internal organs. You don't usually get rid of it. And recently, like I bring out in one chapter in the book, scientists have found that there's a fat that they call brown fat, which has a light brown color to it when you look at it under a microscope. And only in the last 10 years have they discovered that this fat, which originally was thought to protect newborn babies for the first year of their life. Newborns don't have the capacity to shiver, so they're vulnerable to cold weather. And this brown fat, which is around the collarbones and neck and spinal column, helps a baby deal with cold weather.
So literally the baby fat.
And they thought, scientists for years thought that it dissipated, it went away after you were a couple of years of age. But now they find that it's still there, and it can be revived primarily through what we've talked about earlier, through cold, dealing with cold water around the neck and shoulders, being in cold water situations. And there's a few foods that help with that. And exercising in cold weather helps too. So, and sleeping in a colder room than what you're used to helps. So there are 4 or 5 different types of fat, and fat is essential. We need at least some fat. But as I talk about in the book, and as many people talk about, at least in the United States, most Americans over the age of 25 or so have too much fat, way too much fat.
All right. Awesome. Yeah. Good stuff. So tell us a little bit about the book and when it's going to come out and where you can get it and where we can reach you.
Yeah, well, the book is going to be on January the 29th, which is I think it's a Tuesday. It'll be in all the bookstores. It'll be in major bookstores and on Amazon and all the book-selling websites. There's dozens of them. And I have a website that I've had up and running for the last 20 years. And it's just called drdarden.com. So DRDARDEN.com. And I've got a lot of information in there on strength training and diet and general fitness activities. So I would welcome and challenge anyone interested. Look me up there.
Awesome. Well, great. Well,
and get a copy of the book, because I think it's very well done by Rodell Publishing, which is now owned by Penguin Random House, a new publisher, but the largest one in the world in New York City.
Yep. Yeah, no, and it's I had a great read. You break things down really well, so it's not, while you use some, while you're addressing some important and complicated aspects, you break it down in a way that is easy to digest.
Yeah, and it's got, Ryan, did you look through all those before and after pictures?
Yeah, there are a lot of great, exactly. There are a lot of great before and after, which is very helpful because it lets us see, there's never anything better than visually seeing how somebody changes over a period of time. So yeah, that part, it was a really welcome kind of aspect of the book.
Yeah, I started taking before and after pictures back in the 1970s, and if you put before and after pictures on the internet, you'll get thousands of them. But you seldom see anybody that standardizes the before and after pictures. So you'll see a guy's picture, outside with a softball bat in his hand, and he weighs 250 pounds. And now you'll see another picture of him with a bathing suit on, weighing 200 pounds, but you're never sure. First, you're not sure it's the same guy, and he's not in the same pose or the same background. So I try to do it in a standardized scientific fashion, and I've got hundreds of these. But the best 16 and then the next best 20 are featured in the book. So the book's 320 pages. It has 25 chapters and 5 different parts. So there's something in there for all men that need to lose fat or build muscle. And there's also a couple of chapters that relate to women. So even though it's called Men's Health Killing Fat, a woman can still profit by reading the book and doing the program.
All right, great. Well, thanks so much for being on the podcast. We'd love to have you back if you have anything else coming up or anything else going on. But yeah, it was great having you on.
So oftentimes when our interview is over, we still speak with the guest afterwards just to talk about logistical things and timing when it's going to go out and if there's any show notes or anything like that. So Ellington gave us some suggestions. He said that we should try doing a chin-up. Basically...
So you start at the top of a pull-up. So you get there however you need to get there, whether you need a chair or you can get yourself up for the one or you have a friend help you get up to the top of the pull-up. He basically said try to do the lower part for 30 seconds. So you take 30 seconds to control yourself down from the pull-up. And then he said for us to build to 60 seconds. So we're going to try that. So if you can, try at the top of the pull-up.
To do that with a lot of different exercises. Yeah. In fact, that's a big point in his book, that if you want to really build muscle, then working the negative. So that's one of his methods in the book. What did you think about the book in general?
It's good. Yeah, there's a lot of good stuff. And like I said, he does break things down very, well. I don't. I'm not a fan of negative training, but I like that he explained it's for building muscle. So I think all this research on negatives is that it's great for building muscle. I think there's some other, if you're doing like a sport. It doesn't necessarily translate to the sport, but if the goal is building muscle, there's no reason why you can't, not to do negatives. So I'm fine with that. And, there's a lot of good stuff in there.
And he's sort of traditional that he believes pretty heavily, and in fact, that's the whole crux of his, in calories in, calories out. Yeah. So that's going to be the power behind his book, which is fine. That is certainly a very workable method, and he also stresses a lot of other things, like he was really into the sort of the cold, the cold plunges and things like that, and it's actually pretty cool. So he has good workout information. It's just good stuff, and it is certainly a method that could work very well. For certain people, mostly for men, but he did mention that there are some chapters in there that could apply to women as well.
Yeah, cool. All right, well, I guess that's it. It was a long first episode of the new year. So hope you guys enjoyed it. That is it. We got we as I've been saying for a while, we got some cool stuff coming up. And we are very close. We actually started recording some of this stuff. So you should get some good content February onward. So that is it. I'm Ryan George.
Well, where does everyone find us?
Oh, yeah.
If they don't know already.
Yeah, if you don't know already. The GymWits.com. You can find all of our stuff, our Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, all that good stuff. So that's it. I'm Ryan George.
I'm Justin Guild, a.k.a. Chef Sonic, reminding you that truth does not sell.
And we are the GymWits.